A young girl living in a wealthy family's mansion was growing up surrounded by comfort, expensive objects, and strict routines, but very little real attention. Her father, a powerful billionaire constantly distracted by business, believed their home was completely safe. The staff followed their daily tasks quietly, and nothing seemed out of place. But things inside the mansion were not as peaceful as they appeared. Hidden within the ordinary routine, something strange was happening, something no one had noticed. Then, during one normal morning, the family's maid stumbled upon an object that should not have been there. She did not understand it at first, but its presence hinted that someone had been watching the little girl without anyone realizing it. That accidental discovery marked the beginning of a series of unsettling clues that slowly revealed a danger silently growing around the child. What seemed like a simple life inside a perfect home was about to change, all because of one unexpected find that raised questions no one was prepared to answer. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. The Whitmore mansion began each morning in a calm and quiet way, as if everything inside followed a strict routine planned long ago. The large rooms were clean, the floors shiny, and every corner showed the wealth of the family. Expensive paintings hung on the walls, and everything looked perfect to anyone who visited. In this big house lived Richard Whitmore, a billionaire who tried to balance his demanding business life with raising his 4-year-old daughter, Emily. Even though he cared for her, he struggled to give her the time she needed. His work schedule controlled almost every hour of his day, and the pressure of his position kept him constantly distracted. He often woke up thinking about meetings, numbers, and decisions, leaving little space for the simple moments of family life. The mansion looked peaceful, but the silence inside it only showed how busy Richard always was and how much he had to handle before even stepping out of the door. While the mansion looked impressive on the outside, the atmosphere inside was very different. It was not loud or messy, but instead full of a quiet that came from emotional distance. Richard moved from room to room, checking messages, answering calls, and preparing documents. He seemed physically present but mentally far away, always thinking about business issues that waited for him. Emily, small and curious, walked around the house without really understanding why her father was always in a hurry. She had everything money could buy, yet she often lacked the simple comfort of company. Toys filled her room, dolls sat neatly on shelves, and colorful blocks were stacked in corners. But none of these things replaced the presence of someone to share her day with. The huge mansion made her tiny footsteps sound even smaller, a reminder of how alone she felt most of the time. Emily spent a lot of her days trying to entertain herself. She sat on the carpet in the living room, surrounded by her toys, creating her own world through imagination. She did not complain, because at her age, she did not fully understand the idea of loneliness, but she still felt something missing. Sometimes she looked toward the hallway, hoping her father would appear and sit with her for a moment. Richard, however, rarely noticed these small gestures, as he was usually rushing to prepare for another meeting or trip. Security guards and staff moved quietly around the house, doing their jobs without disturbing anyone, but they did not fill the emotional space Emily needed. She often played with her favorite toys, arranging them carefully, talking softly to them as if they were her friends. Her innocence made the silence feel less heavy, but that silence was always present, echoing through the large rooms where she spent most of her time. Meanwhile, Richard got ready for another busy day. He checked his wristwatch repeatedly, organized his briefcase, and reviewed his schedule once more. His routine was full of responsibilities that kept him constantly moving. He did not notice how quickly time passed or how often he missed small moments with Emily. He told himself he was doing everything for her future, but he rarely stopped to think about her present. As he walked through the mansion, his attention was already focused on the world outside, business deals, negotiations, and upcoming flights. Employees greeted him politely, and he answered with a quick nod, barely slowing his pace. Even though he lived in a luxurious environment, he rarely enjoyed any of it. His life had become a long list of tasks and expectations, leaving him little room to breathe or reflect. Each morning looked the same, and each day brought new demands. The mansion, though beautiful, carried a sense of emotional emptiness that neither wealth nor structure could hide. Richard tried to be a good father in the ways he understood, providing comfort, safety, and opportunities. But he struggled to give the one thing Emily needed most: his time. He was often unaware of how much his absence shaped the daily life inside the house. Emily learned to create her own fun, to play quietly, and to stay near her toys instead of seeking attention she knew she would not get. The staff cared for her with kindness, but they could not replace the bond she needed with her father. The large halls and high ceilings only made the distance between them feel bigger. Even on days when Richard was physically home, he was mentally somewhere else, focused on work matters that never seemed to end. Richard did not realize that his life was about to change. As he prepared to leave once again, thinking of nothing but the business tasks waiting for him, he had no idea that the routine he relied on was about to be shaken. Emily continued playing on the carpet, humming softly while arranging her toys, unaware of the shift that was soon to happen in their lives. The calm morning inside the mansion hid the tension of something important approaching, something that would affect both father and daughter deeply. For now, everything seemed normal. Richard walked toward the door, staff moved quietly, and Emily stayed in her usual spot. But beneath this ordinary scene, a turning point was coming, ready to alter the predictable pattern of their days and reveal just how fragile the balance in their home truly was. Grace Miller started her morning early, just like she did every day since she began working at the mansion. She was now in her second month there, and she already knew the routine well. She moved through the house quietly, making sure everything was in order before Emily woke up. Grace was always gentle with the little girl, treating her with patience and care. Emily seemed to trust her, often smiling when Grace entered the room. That morning, Grace helped Emily get ready for breakfast. She sat the girl down and began brushing her fine, soft hair, making sure not to pull too hard. It was a calm and simple moment, something Grace had done many times before. She hummed softly while brushing, trying to make Emily feel comfortable. Everything felt normal, just part of the usual start to the day inside the big mansion where work was constant and silence was common. As Grace continued brushing Emily's hair, she noticed something unusual. Her fingers felt a small knot between the thin strands, something that did not belong there. At first, she thought it might be a piece of lint or dirt, but when she gently pulled it out, she saw it was something else entirely. Grace looked closely at it and saw a tiny metallic object that looked like a small button. It was smooth, round, and too strange to be something that naturally got stuck in a child's hair. Emily, curious as always, watched Grace's expression and asked what the object was. Grace did not want the girl to worry, so she kept her voice calm and told her it was just something dirty that she would throw away. She smiled at Emily to keep her relaxed, even though inside she felt uneasy about what Emily accepted Grace's explanation without questioning further, and she went back to swinging her feet and waiting for breakfast. Grace, however, could not shake the strange feeling the object gave her. It did not look like anything a child would normally find or play with. It seemed out of place in every possible way. She turned her back to Emily for a moment and slipped the small metallic piece into her pocket, making sure the girl did not see. Grace wanted to look at it again later, somewhere private, where she could examine it more closely. Even though she tried to keep her expression calm, her mind was full of questions. She wondered how long it had been in Emily's hair and how it ended up there in the first place. Grace continued brushing, but she could not stop thinking about the odd item she now carried. Once Emily's hair was neat and ready, Grace helped her stand up and guided her toward the dining area. The mansion was still quiet, as it usually was in the morning, and everything looked normal at a first glance. But for Grace, the quiet now felt different. She found herself paying more attention than usual. Every shadow, every detail in the hallways seemed more important. She tried to act natural, but the sensation of worry followed her. While Emily walked ahead, humming softly, Grace touched the pocket of her uniform where the object was hidden. She felt its small weight and wondered again what it could be. Her thoughts kept returning to the same questions. How had something like that ended up tangled in a child's hair, and what could it possibly mean? As they reached the dining room, Grace continued her duties as if nothing had happened. She prepared Emily's plate, made sure she was comfortable, and kept a close eye on her. Emily chatted in her simple, childlike way, not bothered at all by what had happened earlier. Grace listened, nodding and smiling when needed, but her focus was divided. The object inside her pocket stayed on her mind, creating a sense of alertness she could not ignore. She wondered if she should mention it to someone, but she hesitated. She did not want to cause unnecessary alarm without knowing what the device truly was. She told herself she would think more about it later, maybe after finishing her morning tasks. For now, she stayed near Emily, watching her carefully as she ate and played with her food. Throughout the rest of the morning, Grace tried to follow her normal routine. She cleaned, organized, and checked each room just as she always did. But her attention was sharper than before. Every small detail in the house caught her eye, and she found herself scanning every space with extra care. She still did not understand how that metallic object had ended up with Emily, and the lack of explanation made her feel even more uneasy. She kept the device hidden in her pocket, planning to examine it once she had a quiet moment. Even though she maintained her usual calm behavior on the outside, her mind continued returning to the same unsettling thought. Something was not right. Grace moved through the mansion, doing her best to stay focused, but the strange discovery stayed with her, shaping the rest of her day in a way she had not expected. Grace spent part of the day alone in the small room reserved for employees, using the quiet moment to finally examine the strange device she had hidden in her pocket. She closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and took a slow breath before opening her hand. The metallic object felt cold and light. She turned it over several times, studying every small detail. It did not look like something a child could have found while playing, and it definitely did not look like a toy. As she looked closer, she noticed tiny marks and a small opening that reminded her of things she had seen in movies or on the news. The idea that it might be a listening device or some kind of microtransmitter came to her mind, and the thought made her stomach tighten. Someone placing something like that on a 4-year-old was disturbing. Grace tried to understand how such an object ended up in Emily's hair, but the more she thought, the fewer answers she found. She knew she could not ignore it, but she also did not want to jump to conclusions. After sitting with the device for a long moment, Grace realized she needed to be careful. She thought about telling Richard immediately, but she imagined how it might sound coming from her. She was still new in the mansion, only in her 2nd month working there, and she feared he might think she was exaggerating or trying to cause trouble. Richard was important, busy, and used to dealing with serious issues. Grace did not want to risk her job or create a misunderstanding. She placed the device back into her pocket and decided on a different approach. Instead of speaking right away, she would watch everything around her more closely. She would look at the people who entered and left the property and try to understand whether something unusual was happening. This thought made her feel a little more in control, though the worry inside her did not disappear. While Grace returned to her duties, Emily continued her day in the same innocent way she always did. She played with her toys, talked to her dolls, and moved around the halls without any idea of the strange discovery Grace had made. Emily's soft laughter and simple questions felt normal, almost comforting, and Grace tried to act as if nothing had changed. She smiled, answered Emily's questions and helped her when needed, but inside she stayed alert. Every sound, every new face, and every unexpected movement caught her attention. She tried not to let Emily notice her worry, because the last thing she wanted was to frighten the little girl. Still, the thought of someone possibly monitoring Emily made Grace feel responsible for keeping her safe. Throughout the day, Grace started noticing small moments she had ignored before. She saw one of the temporary gardeners stepping away to take a call, speaking softly and turning his back to the main house. It could have been nothing, but now, with the device hidden in her pocket, it looked suspicious. She also noticed a quick visit from a man who said he was a technician. He stayed only a few minutes, barely spoke to the staff, and left without making eye contact. Before finding the strange device, Grace might not have cared about these things, but now, these small details seemed different, like pieces of something she could not yet understand. She kept telling herself that she might be wrong, that maybe she was reading too much into normal situations, but the uneasy feeling stayed with her. As Grace moved around the mansion, she became more aware of how many people came and went during a normal day. Delivery workers, maintenance staff, and temporary employees passed through the gates without drawing much attention. Before, this movement felt normal and harmless, part of the daily routine of such a large property. Now, Grace looked at each person with new eyes. She watched their expressions, their actions, and the reasons they gave for being there. She paid attention to how long they stayed, who they talked to, and whether they seemed in a hurry. She did all this quietly, without making it obvious. She did not want anyone to know she was suspicious, especially if someone truly dangerous was involved. She kept her posture calm, continuing her tasks as if nothing had changed. The mansion, which had always felt quiet and controlled, seemed different to Grace now. It no longer felt like just a wealthy home, filled with expensive art and calm routines. Instead, it felt like a place hiding something. The hallways felt heavier, as if secrets were waiting behind every door. Grace realized she was the only one noticing these things. No one else seemed alert or concerned. Everyone followed their usual tasks, unaware of anything strange. That knowledge made Grace feel both responsible and alone. She knew she had to stay watchful, at least until she understood what was happening. For now, she kept the mysterious device carefully hidden and continued observing everything, knowing that whatever was going on in the mansion was far from harmless. Grace spent the week watching everything more closely than before, trying to understand who moved through the mansion and why. She paid attention to the schedules of the temporary workers and compared them to the moments she remembered seeing them around the house. Each day, she reviewed in her mind what time people arrived, where they walked, and how long they stayed. She tried to act normal around everyone, greeting them politely and doing her tasks as usual, but inside, she was focused on every detail. She noticed small things she had ignored before, like which workers avoided eye contact, who seemed in a hurry, and who lingered near places they had no reason to be. Grace did not want to draw suspicion, so she kept all her observations to herself, using only her memory to put the pieces together. Even though she had no training in investigations, her intuition pushed her to keep going. She wanted answers, especially because Emily was involved, and that made everything more urgent in her mind. Each passing day added to her growing worry, and she knew she needed to stay alert. As she continued gathering information silently, Grace found something that confirmed her concerns even more. She checked the logs where every visitor and worker was supposed to be recorded, and she searched carefully for the name of the technician who had visited the mansion days earlier. She looked through every page, reading slowly, making sure she did not miss anything, but the man's name was nowhere to be found. There was no record of him entering the house, no signature, no appointment, nothing. The absence stood out like a warning. Someone had come into the mansion without following any official procedure, and that person had walked near Emily's room. Grace felt her chest tighten when she realized this. It was no longer just a strange object found in a child's hair. Now she had proof that someone had entered the property unnoticed. She tried to stay calm, but the discovery made her even more focused on the possibility that someone had been watching Emily for longer than anyone knew. Determined to continue her search, Grace spent time outside the house when she could, walking around the garden areas without attracting attention. She pretended to check plants or tidy small details while her eyes scanned every corner. In one of the less visited parts of the garden, she noticed something unusual on the ground. The soil was disturbed in a way that did not match the surrounding area, and when she looked closer, she found fresh footprints. They were not from the staff she usually saw, and they were too recent to ignore. The footprints were in a place that workers rarely visited, which made them even stranger. Grace crouched down and studied them without touching anything, trying to understand their direction. The marks suggested someone had walked close to the outer walls of the mansion, choosing paths that were harder to see from the main house. This discovery added another piece to her growing suspicion that someone had been moving around the property in secret. Back inside, Grace took out the device she had found in Emily's hair and examined it again. She pressed the small metal piece gently between her fingers, and this time she heard a faint electric noise coming from inside it. It was very soft, almost unnoticeable, but enough to confirm that the object was active in some way. The sound made her feel uneasy. She did not understand the technology behind it, but she knew a regular hair accessory or random object would not make that kind of noise. This confirmed what she had feared all along. Someone had placed a device meant to transmit or listen, and they had put it on a 4-year-old child. Grace held the object for a moment longer before hiding it again. Her doubts were now stronger, and she felt even more responsible for protecting Emily. With everything she had observed, the unknown technician, the footprints in the garden, and the device making noise, Grace began piecing together a scenario in her mind. She imagined someone watching Emily for days, maybe even weeks, without anyone in the mansion noticing. The idea made her feel both angry and afraid. She wondered how long this person had been near the child and what their intentions might be. Grace went over her memories, trying to recall every unusual face she had seen recently, every small detail that felt out of place. The puzzle was not complete, but she could see enough to understand that something serious was happening. Still, she knew she had no solid proof that would convince others. Everything she had was based on observations and intuition, not clear evidence. This made her more cautious in deciding what to do next. Even with so many suspicions, Grace chose not to inform Richard yet. She feared he would doubt her or think she was overreacting. Instead, she decided to stay close to Emily every chance she got. She kept the girl near her throughout the day, finding reasons to accompany her to different rooms and making sure she was never left alone for long. Grace tried to hide her tension, acting calm and friendly so that Emily would not feel worried. At the same time, she watched every person who came close to the child, studying their movements and their tone of voice. The mansion no longer felt like a safe place to her, and she treated every corner as if something could be hiding behind it. Even without clear proof, Grace knew that staying alert was the only thing she could do for now. She continued her silent investigation, determined to protect Emily, even if she had to face the situation alone. Grace spent part of the afternoon near the garage, pretending to organize some cleaning supplies while keeping an eye on the workers outside. She did not want to seem suspicious, so she moved slowly, picking up items and placing them back on the shelves as if this were part of her normal routine. The garage was quiet, with only faint noises from the garden reaching her ears. She stayed hidden behind a stack of boxes, using the position to observe without being seen. She was tense, but she knew she needed to stay calm. Her goal was only to watch, not to cause attention. As she waited, she noticed the temporary gardener stepping to the side of the garage, holding his phone to his ear. His voice was low, but the tone of his conversation did not sound friendly. Grace stayed completely still, hoping he would not notice her behind the boxes. Her heart beat faster, knowing she might hear something important. The longer she listened, the clearer the gardener's words became. He was not speaking casually or about work. His voice sounded urgent, almost impatient, as he talked to the person on the other end of the call. Grace leaned slightly forward, careful not to make noise. Then she heard him say something that made her body freeze. He mentioned the right time to get the girl. For a second, Grace felt as if the air around her had disappeared. She kept listening, her hands shaking as he continued the conversation. He also mentioned Richard's name, but not in a respectful or neutral way. His tone was sharp and threatening, as if Richard was part of a dangerous plan or someone the caller wanted to use for leverage. These few words were enough to confirm what Grace had feared. Someone was planning to kidnap Emily. The gardener's voice held no hesitation, no doubt. Grace realized the situation was real and serious. Shaken, Grace stepped back slowly, making sure her footsteps were silent. She did not want the gardener to hear movement and come looking. Her mind ran through every detail she had observed over the past days. The missing visitor record, the footprints in the garden, the strange technician, and especially the device found in Emily's hair. Everything suddenly connected. She understood now that the small object had not been placed by accident. It had been used to monitor Emily from inside the house. Someone had been watching her routine closely, learning her habits, waiting for the right moment to take her. Grace felt her stomach twist as she thought about how close the danger had always been. She reminded herself that Emily was still safe for the moment, but the threat was much more immediate than she had imagined. She needed to act carefully, and she needed to act fast. With her pulse racing, Grace made her way back into the mansion. She forced herself to walk normally, even though her thoughts were spinning. She reminded herself over and over to look calm, to breathe slowly, to blend in with the everyday routine of the house. She passed by staff members, giving polite nods, trying to keep her expression steady. No one could know she had just overheard a kidnapping plan. If she looked frightened or panicked, someone involved might notice and react. Grace could not risk making the situation worse. As she walked through the halls, she focused on finding Emily as quickly as possible. The girl's safety became her main priority. Everything else could wait. Grace kept her hands steady even though her nerves were on edge, and she prepared herself for the rest of the day. Once she found Emily, Grace stayed close to her for the entire afternoon. She created excuses to remain with her, suggesting games, helping her with toys, and guiding her from room to room. Emily did not notice the change, since Grace was always gentle and caring. But this time, Grace's attention was intense. She watched every person who came near them. She listened for every phone call, every unfamiliar voice, every unusual movement. The mansion, which had once felt like a normal workplace, now seemed full of hidden dangers. Grace imagined threats lurking in the most ordinary spaces, the hallway, the living room, even the garden outside. She stayed alert, scanning everything silently while still trying to act like her usual self around Emily. It was a difficult balance, but she managed to maintain it hour after hour. All she could think about was keeping the child safe until she found a way to take action. As the day went on, Grace understood that she could not avoid confrontation forever. Someone inside or around the mansion was helping with the plan, and she would eventually need to speak up or stop them directly. The thought made her anxious because she feared no one would believe her. She was still new to the job, and she had no solid proof to show Richard or anyone else. The device, the footprints, the missing log entry, and the overheard conversation were all frightening, but none of it was official evidence. Grace worried that if she spoke too soon, she might be dismissed or ignored. Yet she also knew she could not stay silent much longer. Emily was in real danger. The mansion now felt like a dangerous maze, and every moment mattered. Grace stayed close to the little girl, preparing herself for whatever she would have to do next, even if the idea of confronting someone scared her deeply. Grace walked through the hallway with firm steps, even though inside she felt nervous and unsure. She knew she could not wait any longer. After hearing the gardener's call and connecting all the strange events from the past days, she understood that Emily was in real danger. She told herself that the only responsible thing to do was to inform Richard. He was the father, the owner of the house, and the one who had the most power to act quickly. Grace stopped in front of his private office door, took a deep breath, and knocked softly. When she heard his voice telling her to enter, she stepped inside. Richard was sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers, looking tired and stressed. He barely looked up when she approached. Grace tried to speak calmly and clearly, even though her heart was beating fast. She began telling him everything she had discovered, starting with the device she removed from Emily's hair, then the suspicious technician, and finally the conversation she overheard near the garage. As Grace continued speaking, she noticed Richard's expression change from confusion to irritation. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a frustrated sigh before interrupting her. He asked if she realized how absurd her story sounded. Grace tried to continue, insisting that she was telling the truth, but Richard raised his voice slightly, accusing her of exaggerating. He said she was misinterpreting harmless situations and creating problems where none existed. Grace stood still, trying to explain the seriousness of what she had heard, but Richard did not let her finish. He clenched his jaw and shook his head, saying he did not have time for this kind of distraction. He insisted that the mansion had excellent security and that nothing like she described could be happening under his roof. The more she tried to speak, the more irritated he became, until he finally told her to stop spreading what he called paranoias. Hearing his words felt like a slap. Grace lowered her eyes for a moment, feeling her confidence weaken. She tried once more to explain, saying she only wanted to protect Emily, but Richard cut her off again. He accused her of trying to get attention, of being irresponsible, and of creating unnecessary fear. Grace felt her throat tighten, and her hands began to tremble. She had come with the intention of helping, of preventing something terrible, but instead she was being treated as someone who was causing trouble. Richard's tone became harsher as he told her to stay focused on her actual job and to stop imagining threats. The office felt smaller with every word he said, as if the walls were closing around her. Grace realized she would not convince him, no matter how hard she tried. When Grace left the office, she walked slowly down the hall, doing her best not to cry. Her chest hurt, and she had to take shallow breaths to keep her emotions under control. She felt humiliated and misunderstood, as if her sincerity had been dismissed entirely. Every word Richard used replayed in her mind, making her feel smaller with each memory. She wiped a tear before it could fall, not wanting anyone to see her upset. She had only wanted to help, yet she had been accused of inventing stories. The rejection felt unfair, especially because she knew she had discovered something real. She had seen enough signs and heard enough evidence to be sure that Emily was at risk. The pain of being ignored pressed heavily on her, and for a brief moment she wondered if she should simply give up. But as soon as she reached the living room and saw Emily playing peacefully on the carpet, Grace's determination returned. The child's innocent expression reminded her why she had insisted so strongly. Emily had no idea of the danger around her. no understanding of the conversations happening behind closed doors. Grace felt a quiet anger replace her earlier sadness. Richard's refusal to listen did not erase the truth of what she had discovered. She knew what she had heard and seen, and she knew that ignoring it could lead to something terrible. She knelt beside Emily, helping her with a toy, keeping her voice soft and steady, even as her mind was focused on staying alert. Grace promised herself silently that she would not let anything happen to the girl, even if she had to act alone. The humiliation from earlier no longer weakened her. It pushed her forward. She told herself that someone had to protect Emily, and if Richard refused to believe the danger, then Grace would simply have to continue investigating without his approval. She would watch every corner of the mansion, pay attention to every unfamiliar face, and keep Emily close at all times. Her fear slowly turned into resolve. The mansion felt tense, and the threat had not disappeared just because Richard refused to believe her. Grace understood that giving up now was not an option. She had seen too much to stand aside. From that moment on, she knew she would do whatever was necessary to keep Emily safe, even if that meant working in silence, without support, and with the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Grace spent the next few days moving through the mansion with a level of attention she had never used before. She made sure to be present in every place Emily went, always keeping the girl within sight. She tried to act natural, smiling and speaking gently so that Emily would not feel the tension she carried inside. But behind every movement, Grace was observing, listening, and looking for anything suspicious. Her steps were careful, and her mind stayed alert from morning to night. She woke up earlier than usual to check the surroundings and stayed up late to make sure nothing strange was happening outside. Each day seemed heavier than the last, and the fear that something dangerous was approaching grew stronger. Still, she refused to let fear slow her down. Grace told herself that every second counted, and she had to stay strong for Emily's sake. Her vigilance began to reveal clues she had not noticed before. One morning, while checking the tools in the storage area near the garden, she opened the cabinet used by the temporary gardener. At first, she expected to find only equipment, but something caught her eye in the corner of the shelf. It was a small notebook, partially hidden behind a toolbox. With cautious hands, she picked it up and flipped through the pages. What she found made her heart race. The notebook contained short notes, sketches, and times, written in rushed handwriting. There were arrows showing paths around the mansion, as well as mentions of specific moments when Emily was usually in certain places, such as the living room or the garden. There were also written times indicating when she was less supervised. Grace stood frozen for a moment, reading the notes again to make sure she understood. The writings were clear. Someone had been planning the child's movements carefully. The routes and schedules matched Emily's daily routine almost perfectly. Grace closed the notebook and placed it back exactly where she found it, making sure nothing looked disturbed. She did not want to alert the gardener that she had discovered his notes. The realization that he had written these details made everything even more urgent. Someone involved in the plan had access to the house, had observed Emily closely, and had recorded the information without anyone noticing. This was no longer a suspicion, it was proof. Grace stepped out of the storage area with a heavy feeling in her chest. She knew she was running out of time. Every detail she uncovered pointed to the same conclusion. The kidnapping was not just being planned, it was nearly ready to happen. As the days continued, Grace also noticed something outside the mansion. While taking Emily to different rooms or walking her through the hallways, she glanced out the windows often. Eventually, she saw a pattern. A car she did not recognize appeared regularly on a distant part of the street. It always parked in the same spot, stayed for nearly the same amount of time, and left quietly. The driver remained unseen, and the windows were dark enough to keep the inside hidden. At first, She wondered if it could be a coincidence, but after seeing the car multiple times at the same hours, she understood it was connected. Someone was watching the property from afar, waiting for the right moment. This discovery added to her anxiety, but it also strengthened her determination not to let anyone take Emily. Despite her fear, Grace continued to act as if everything was normal. Around Emily, she remained gentle and patient, helping her with toys, fixing her hair, and guiding her from one activity to another. But her eyes were constantly scanning the area. She listened for unfamiliar voices, unexpected footsteps, or unusual noises. She also planned ahead, thinking of ways to change Emily's routine to make the kidnapper's schedule useless. She began adjusting mealtimes, playtimes, and even where they spent time in the mansion. Grace moved Emily around in a way that seemed natural but prevented predictable patterns. It was her way of disrupting the kidnapper's plan without revealing that she knew anything. By putting together all the information she had gathered, the notebook, the unknown car, the conversation behind the garage, the device found in Emily's hair, Grace understood fully that the kidnapping attempt was extremely close. Every clue pointed to a plan that had been prepared with care and patience. The danger was not distant or theoretical, it was imminent. With no support from Richard, Grace knew she had to rely on her own judgment. She walked through the mansion with caution, thinking through every step and every decision. She prepared herself mentally for the possibility that the attempt could happen at any moment. Even though she felt fear constantly, Grace turned that fear into focus. She refused to let anything distract her from keeping Emily safe. Giving up was not an option, and letting her guard down could cost too much. Grace continued her silent battle, knowing she might be the only one standing between Emily and the people planning to take her. The afternoon seemed calm at first, and everything inside the mansion looked like part of a normal day. Grace stayed close to Emily as usual, guiding her from room to room and keeping her busy with simple games. She tried to hide her worry, even though inside she felt tense after days of watching every corner of the property. Emily, as always, was cheerful and innocent, unaware of the danger around her. At one point, Grace let the girl play near the living room window while she picked up a few toys from the floor. That was when she noticed the temporary gardener standing outside, a little too close to the house. He waved at Emily and called to her, smiling in a way that seemed friendly at first glance. He said he had found a lost toy in the garden and wanted to show it to her. His tone was gentle, but something about the way he insisted made Grace feel alarmed. She saw Emily take a step toward the door, curious about the lost toy, and Grace's instincts reacted instantly. She put down everything she was holding and moved quickly toward the girl before she could get closer to the exit. The moment Grace reached the doorway, she felt a rush of certainty that this was the moment she had feared. The gardener repeated his invitation, telling Emily to come outside for just a second, promising it would be quick. His eyes did not look at Grace. They focused only on the child, and that alone made Grace's heart race. She placed herself between Emily and the doorway, holding the girl gently but firmly. She told Emily they needed to stay inside and tried to make her voice sound calm so the little girl would not feel scared. Without hesitation, Grace closed the door and locked it before the gardener had a chance to step closer. When he realized she had seen through his intentions, his expression changed. The friendly smile faded, replaced by frustration and anger. He reached for the door, as if testing whether he could force it open, but Grace kept it locked, her hands steady even though she felt terrified inside. For a brief moment, the gardener pushed against the door, trying to force it open. Grace held Emily close with one arm and braced herself with the other. Emily clung to her, confused and frightened. Grace whispered to her to stay calm, promising she would keep her safe. The man outside muttered something under his breath, then quickly looked around. When he spotted movement from a passing car on the street, he seemed to panic. He realized the opportunity had been lost and that he had been discovered. Without another attempt, he turned and ran across the garden, disappearing behind the outer wall of the property. Grace kept the door locked for several seconds, listening for any sound that suggested he was still nearby. When she was finally sure he had fled, she picked up Emily in her arms and began moving quickly through the house. Her entire body was shaking, but she knew she had to stay in control for the child's sake. Grace moved fast, holding Emily tightly as she made her way down the hall. Emily was crying softly, and Grace kept repeating that everything would be okay, even though she was still shaking from the fear of what had almost happened. She reached for her phone with one hand and immediately called the police. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. She told them someone had tried to take the child and that she needed help right away. The person on the other end assured her that officers were on their way. Grace did not waste any time. She hurried toward one of the secure rooms inside the mansion, a place with a stronger lock and no direct access to the outside. She stepped inside, locked the door, and sat down on the floor with Emily still in her arms. Her breath came fast, but she focused on calming the girl, stroking her hair and whispering that she was safe now. Inside the secure room, Grace listened closely for any sound from outside. Every small noise made her tense, but she held Emily close, trying to keep herself steady. The minutes felt long, and the quiet inside the house only made her more aware of how close they had come to disaster. Even though she knew the gardener had run away, her mind kept replaying the moment at the door, the way he had tried to lure Emily outside, and the way he pushed against the lock when he realized he had been caught. Grace reminded herself that she had acted quickly, and that her instincts had been right from the beginning. If she had hesitated even for a second, the outcome might have been entirely different. Emily eventually relaxed a little, resting her head on Grace's shoulder, although she still seemed confused by everything that had happened. Finally, the sound Grace had been waiting for filled the air, the sirens approaching the mansion. She felt a deep rush of relief, knowing help had finally arrived. She stayed inside the secure room until the voices of the officers reached the hallway. Only then did she unlock the door and step out, still holding Emily close. The police hurried toward them, ready to take her statement and search the property. Grace felt exhausted, but she answered every question, determined to give them all the information she had gathered over the past days. The failed kidnapping confirmed everything she had suspected, showing that the danger had been real and much closer than anyone else had believed. As the officers began their work, Grace kept Emily by her side, knowing the threat had revealed itself at last, but also knowing that she had protected the child when it mattered most. When the police arrived at the mansion, they immediately began examining every detail that Grace had reported. Officers moved through the hallways, questioned the staff, and inspected the garden where the temporary gardener had tried to take Emily. Grace stayed close to the child the entire time, answering every question as clearly as she could. She explained how she found the strange device in Emily's hair, how she overheard the suspicious phone call, and how she discovered the hidden notebook with escape routes and vulnerable times. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and confirming that her observations lined up with what they already knew about similar cases. Grace watched as they studied the device, recognizing its purpose as a tool used by criminal groups to monitor targets. Hearing this from professionals made her feel both validated and shaken. The situation had been even more dangerous than she realized, and she felt relief that she had acted quickly enough to stop it. As the investigation continued, the police gathered proof that the temporary gardener was not working alone. They identified him as part of a group known for planning kidnappings with precision. The notes, the device, and the gardener's actions matched patterns seen in other cases involving the same group. When Richard listened to the officers explain their findings, his face changed completely. He looked stunned, overwhelmed and deeply troubled. He stood silently for a moment, processing everything. His earlier disbelief in Grace's warnings now felt like a mistake too heavy to ignore. Seeing the evidence laid out in front of him made the truth impossible to deny. The threat to Emily had been real, and it had been closer than he had ever imagined. He realized Grace had been right from the very beginning. Richard finally walked toward the room where Grace and Emily waited. His steps were slow, and his expression showed a mix of regret and exhaustion. When he entered, Emily was sitting next to Grace, holding her hand tightly. Richard looked at both of them, but when his eyes met Grace's, he seemed unable to speak at first. The weight of guilt pressed on him. He took a deep breath and apologized, not with quick or careless words, but with sincerity. He admitted that he had been wrong to ignore her warnings. He told her that his stress and exhaustion had blinded him, and that he failed to protect his own daughter when she needed him most. His voice shook slightly when he said that Grace's actions had saved Emily from something terrible. The sincerity in his apology was clear, and he waited quietly for her response. Grace listened to him cautiously at first. Her heart was still beating fast from everything that had happened. She remembered the moment he accused her of imagining things, the humiliation she felt, and the fear she carried alone for days. But she also saw the honesty in his eyes now. The danger had passed, and Emily was safe because she had trusted her instincts. Grace felt tears forming, though she tried to stay composed. She nodded slowly and accepted Richard's apology. She did not say much, but her expression showed relief. It mattered to her that the truth had finally come to light and that her efforts were no longer dismissed. Emily looked between them, unaware of the full meaning of the exchange, but sensing the tension easing. For Grace, being believed after so much fear felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. The police soon took further steps to secure the mansion. Officers placed patrol cars around the property and checked the perimeter for any signs of the missing accomplices. They advised Richard about additional security measures and warned him that the group behind the attempted kidnapping might still be nearby. More investigators arrived to gather evidence, take statements, and coordinate searches for the suspects who had been part of the plan. The presence of trained officers brought a sense of safety back to the mansion. Richard followed every instruction carefully, finally fully aware of how vulnerable his daughter had been. Grace stayed close to Emily while the officers worked, making sure the girl felt protected and calm. By the end of the day, the atmosphere in the mansion had changed completely. Fear was still present, but now it was matched with action and protection. The investigation was in full motion, and the police were determined to track down the rest of the criminals involved. Grace felt tired, but also relieved. Everything she had feared had been real, and now everyone finally understood the seriousness of the threat. Richard remained close to Emily as well, humbled by the realization of how close he had come to losing her. The officers promised to watch the property closely and continue the search for the remaining suspects. For the first time in days, Grace felt she was not fighting alone. The truth had been revealed, and Emily was safe because she refused to ignore her instincts. In the days that followed, the atmosphere inside the mansion changed in a way that everyone could feel. The tension that had once filled the hallways was replaced by a calmer and warmer routine. Richard, who had spent so much of his life absorbed in work, now made a clear effort to be present. He woke up earlier to have breakfast with Emily, walked with her through the house, and paused meetings whenever she needed him. He no longer treated time with her as something secondary. Instead, he acted as if each moment mattered. Grace noticed these changes and felt relieved that he was finally giving attention to what truly mattered. She continued caring for Emily with the same dedication as before, but now she no longer felt alone in protecting the girl. The fear of the past days slowly faded, and the house began to feel safe again. Emily, still too young to understand everything that had happened, simply enjoyed the extra affection and the new routine that included more time with her father. Richard also made sure to acknowledge Grace's bravery. He spoke openly to the staff, saying she had acted with responsibility and courage during a moment of real danger. He apologized again, this time in front of others, making it clear that she had earned his complete trust. In response, he improved her working conditions, giving her more support and flexibility. Grace felt surprised but grateful, as she had never expected recognition. She had acted purely out of instinct and care for Emily, not for praise. Still, hearing Richard speak so respectfully about her made the difficult days feel worthwhile. Emily, in her innocent way, continued to show affection by holding Grace's hand more often, calling her name frequently, and wanting her close during playtime. To the little girl, Grace had simply been the person who kept her safe, and that bond grew stronger with each passing day. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation outside the mansion. With the information Grace had provided and the evidence found after the failed kidnapping attempt, officers were able to track down the remaining members of the group responsible for the plan. One by one, the suspects were located and arrested. When the news reached the mansion, both Grace and Richard felt a sense of relief. The threat that had once felt so close and frightening was now over. The officers assured them that the family was no longer being targeted and that the group's operation had been completely interrupted. Knowing this allowed everyone in the house to breathe more freely again. Grace felt her body relax in a way it had not done in days. Emily continued her routine without fear, unaware of how much danger had surrounded her before. With the threat gone, life in the mansion slowly settled into a new rhythm. For the first time in a long while, the house felt like a real home instead of just a large and quiet place. The staff worked with a sense of calm, and Richard stopped rushing through rooms without noticing what was happening around him. He spent more time in the living room with Emily, helping her build puzzles or watching her draw. Grace often stayed nearby, ready to help, but also enjoying the peace that had returned. There were no suspicious movements outside, no unfamiliar cars parked at a distance, and no shadows that made her stop and wonder. The difference from the previous stressful days was clear, and the house seemed brighter and steadier because of it. Grace continued doing her work with the same dedication she had always shown, but now she did so with more confidence. She knew Richard trusted her completely, and she felt respected in her role. Emily often ran to her with excitement, eager to show drawings or toys, and Grace responded with the same gentle patience she had always had. Watching the girl grow and play safely gave her a quiet sense of pride. She felt fulfilled, knowing she had made a real difference in the child's life. Richard also became more aware of how important Grace was to Emily, and he no longer underestimated her observations or instincts. He understood clearly that she had protected what he valued most when he himself had failed to see the danger. As more days passed peacefully, a strong sense of unity formed inside the mansion. Gratitude replaced fear, and trust replaced doubt. Richard made an effort to be a better father. Grace continued to watch over Emily with care, and Emily remained surrounded by people who truly wanted her safe and happy. The events of the past had been frightening, but they had also brought the household closer together. The mansion returned to its quiet routine, but now with warmth instead of distance. Grace stayed firm in her position, knowing she had earned her place not through words, but through actions that had protected a child's life. And Richard, finally understanding the value of the people around him, made sure she never felt dismissed again. Emily continued to grow in safety, watched over by both her father and the woman who had saved her, completing a new chapter of peace inside the Whitmore mansion. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.